Good afternoon, reconvening our House Investigative Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01. Members, noting the presence of all except Representatives Kobayashi and Yamashita, who are excused, who I'm sure will be joining us shortly. We also have members of staff, tech staff, and our HMSO staff in the room. And then we have staff on Zoom along with our LLO team. Members, today, this part of the agenda is to take testimony from Mr. James Nakatani, Executive Director of the Agribusiness Development Corporation, and Ms. Myra Kaichi, Senior Executive Assistant of the Agribusiness Development Corporation, on the management, oversight, and disposition of public lands held by the Agribusiness Development Corporation on the islands of Kauai. I'm looking for the oath of affirmation so that we can get started. They're going to start, members, with a presentation, brief presentation on the Kauai lands. And members, you received over 1,600 documents from ADC on this subject matter. This, members, is again, indicative of the work we have in front of us, and I do want to thank them for pulling together these documents so quickly. My view is that a lot of this today will be a basic primer 101 on the Kauai lands in ADC, as this was omitted from much discussion in the audit. We will have questions and answers, but I also expect that we will be delving into the documents over the next 2 weeks, especially when we have the break between hearings, and then that we might be recalling witnesses back for questions on these lands. So on that note, members, if I could have Mr. Nakatani and Ms. Kaichi please stand to take the oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. And for the record, noting that both witnesses testified in the affirmative. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Nakatani and Ms. Kaichi, to do the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Belatti, Vice Chair Ichiyama, and members of the committee. My name is Jimmy Nakatani. I'm Executive Director of ADC. First slide, I want to give you a basic presentation of the Kauai lands. Hopefully, everybody was able to watch the videos that we sent the last time on Kauai. I mean, that would give you a really good feel of what the operations were on Kauai and everything else again. This is an aerial view of Kikaha. And as you can see, basically we're talking about the Mana Plains, which is the lower area, you know. My supervisor over here. Thank you. And then the Kikaha acreages, I mean, it's like basically net gross acreage is 12,592. Mana Plains tillable acres are 62,14 acres. Mauka tillable acres is actually Mauka tillable acres, not really tillable, 1,297 acres. Percentage occupancy is 53%. Next slide. I want to just point out that the Mauka lands in the light green that's going up north, yeah, those are the lands. We really don't have much plans for those lands, basically because we don't have enough water over there. I mean, just because of the divide and everything else like that. And plus those lands are highly erodible and hard to get to. So in the days of the plantation that was very lucrative for us, is not for the tenants, or it's not that economically viable. Some of the issues, just want to point out that the yellow dot on the far right in the middle is one of the hydros, and then the other square dot right in the middle is another hydro, and then the blue dot on the far left is where the pumps are. Okay, and then the squiggly lines on the bottom going up is the it's the Kikaha ditch. And the other squiggly line that has coming down that is divided is the Kokei ditch. Okay, just to give you reference of when we're talking about ditches and everything else like that. Okay. Just want to maybe, and then, I mean, it's, guess I have a legend over there. The purple is Hartong, the red is Cortiva, the yellow is Bex, the orange is Kauai Shrimp, and the green is West Kauai Energy Project. And you can barely see that, but it's a gray, it's untillable. And you can see that pink is unlicensed. And again, the Malco Fields is light green. I want to point out that the black is a Waikea farm project that KA is doing. And that's approximately 500 acres. Yeah. And that's to kind of address the diversified agricultural needs in Kikaha. Next page is like, those are the current lessees that we have. And I just want to go back and we submitted some documents, and I just want to point out that some of the acreages might not match. And what we discovered, and this is kind of like before times, that the companies were exchanging lands. In other words, they were exchanging lands to grow crops on each other's land. Okay, so give an example like Sunrise Shrimp. I mean, there was 182 acres that Hartong occupied and everything else like that. Just wanted to point out that, and we had other tenants that were kind of exchanging lands before. In a scheme of government, that doesn't really look good, and we're trying to address that. And what happened in 2017, we were made aware of that, and we kind of put a moratorium on that and to stop that practice. But 2019, we started to, again, be a little bit more careful, document all of these things. And it's really a great thing for agriculture, you know, for crop rotation and exchanging lands and everything like that. In fact, you know, other parcels in Kalepa, I mean, that's what we're trying to promote, to have crop rotation, not monocrop on one piece of land and everything else like that. So we're trying to get a handle on that. All of that is, we're trying to do that by going to the board, so it's open. So, you know, and I just want to emphasize that in the private sector, they do this, okay? And at no time did ADC or the state lose any revenues from that. There was no sandwiching, like people taking advantage of, you know, subleasing it to somebody else and making money. And there was, excuse me, and there was no profit taking. So that was a pretty good, I think that practice that they had in Kikaha. It didn't look good on paper, I guess, when you say that, but we don't know what's going on. And we kind of brought everybody back to the table, because prior to that, this administration, there wasn't many people out there. And I got to give credit to KAA, the association, for putting this package together and keeping the lands farmable, you know, and that's pretty, you know, in a nutshell, what happened there. Next slide. And this is the former cooperative made up of existing ADC tenants, you know, all of that you saw before. And KA has an agreement with ADC to maintain and manage the common areas and infrastructure of the Kikaha agricultural lands. And we stand corrected. I think that when we said the ROMA was for 35 years, like I said, the auditor did his job. It is 20 years. It's not 35. Yeah, thank you. Next slide. This is the farming tenants who also, as KA members, provide much needed jobs. It's about 400 full-time jobs, and includes part-time and contract jobs as also. Next slide. I think the importance of Kikaha agricultural lands to the local community. Land's electrical system include 2 hydropowers, which I described. Manage the water level streams and ditches, prevents Kikaha, as well as the Navy missile range from flooding during the storm. And here you see, which is pretty neat, is a new venture by one of the companies. And what they do is that's actually alfalfa, growing alfalfa. You see those blocks, you can hardly see it, but it's tiny blocks that going up there. Those are cubes, like hay bales like that, which is pretty, I think, pretty innovative. And they're finding that it's profitable, and especially for the livestock industry, that they can sell. And so that's kind of a new thing for them, but it's a good thing. And it's a cover crop, so it improves the soil, yeah. So everything. Okay, next slide. This is the Kawaii Pump, 1, 2, and 3. Excuse me. So And this is what keeps the plains dry, Kika dry. So, it's a daily operation, and it can range from 6 million gallons a day to maybe 40 million gallons a day, trying to keep the plains dry, depending on the season and how much water is coming down. But very important function of the KAA. Irrigation, operations include irrigation, Waimea Watershed Agreements, minimal water flow for, and then we have minimal, as I said, Malco for the Malco fields, drainage, Clean Water Act Settlements Agreement, Nohili, one of the pumps are deactivated, and, best management practice inspections that we do. They also do roads and bridges, and then we had a CIP recently, $600,000 CIP just to have designs for the bridges that the KA operates. And I think that it's like, they operate like 20 miles of roads, interior roads, and 28 miles of irrigation. So power generation, distribution, we got decreased a little bit. I guess the power generated went down because of the interim in-stream flow that the pending case is going on, and they're trying to repower the Waiava hydro, and that hydro has been in operation for over 100 years. It still works. Okay. This is the West Kauai energy project, and this is to do basically to with KIUC, and it's moving along, and it's like Pualua, then to Puapai. Mana Reservoir includes both rehab of the existing state infrastructures, as well as the new constructions of irrigation infrastructure and solar hydroelectric facilities. And on the bottom, what it is we can give you more information, but it's a pump storage project where water comes down and they use the solar to pump the water back up during the day, and they release the water at night to generate electricity. Something similar that we're looking at maybe Perruso's area with pump hydro in Waiawa. That's always a consideration. Yeah. And I'm going to turn over the Waimea Watershed Agreement because this is a water agreement that's above my pay grade. So I'm going to use my system to give you scoop on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy, Chair Belatti, Vice Chair Ichiyama, members, Myra Kaichi from ADC. So there has been questions and interests in some of the litigation that ADC has been involved in over the last 5 years or so. The first of these cases was before the Commission on Water Resource Management. It was an administrative petition. The plaintiffs asked the Commission to establish interim in-stream flow standards for the Waimea River and its tributaries, and also asked that ADC be enjoined to stop any waste that is excessive use of water or taking of water that we weren't using reasonably. Next slide. The case went for about 2 years, I think, and settled. And it was an historic settlement. We refer to it as the Waimea Watershed Agreement. Under the Waimea Watershed Agreement, the Commission and all of the parties, by agreement, set in-stream flows, interim in-stream flows. On the ADC Kekaha ditch side, well, let me explain. Part of the settlement included the Kauai Island Utilities Cooperative, who is going to take over the Kokei ditch, improve the ditch, the 100-year ditch, provide irrigation water to the DHHL homestead lands, all as part and parcel of the West Kauai Energy Project. And there's so many moving parts to this. And it was a very difficult agreement to reach because there are so many components. But we all knew that if we could reach an agreement, we would accomplish a lot of what we were all going after, even if we seemed to be adverse, which was to reduce the amount of water that was diverted from the streams, to establish the West Kauai Energy Project, which would move the county of Kauai closer to, or the island of Kauai closer to 100% renewable energy faster than if we didn't do this. It provided a lot of assistance to the DHHL homesteading lots above. And it also helped ADC improve the irrigation system, the Kikaha ditch, which was going to remain with ADC. So the starting point for that was, of course, establishing in-stream flow standards. And the Commission on Water Resource Management established in-stream flow standards for the Kauai River, Kauai Stream at 2 million gallons. Next slide. It established in-stream flow standards for Waihulu at 8 million gallons. Next slide. It established in-stream flow standards for Waimea River at 25 million gallons. But there really isn't anything that any of the parties are doing to create that flow, except for our meeting of the in-stream flows of all of the tributaries above, which eventually flow into the Waimea River. ADC has been meeting its in-stream flows for Kauai and Waihulu. The deal with the arrangement, the agreement with Waimea River, is that ADC can take 6 million gallons, no less than 6 million gallons at an area called Hukipo, a valley and ridge on the above the plains. Anytime the ditch, regardless of the flow of the Waimea River at 25 million gallons. When the flow is above 25 million gallons, we can take more than 6. We can, if the flow is below 25 million at the river, we cannot take more than 6 million gallons. And this is the area that we are working on, we're struggling with. We still have not yet received all our permitting to actually do more permanent modifications of our intakes. But just from the KAA going up on a regular basis and playing with the diversions, we're actually able to meet the in-stream flows at the tributaries. Waimea River is a little more difficult because that flow is determined in the tail race of the Mauka Hydro, about 4.5 to 5 miles away from Hukipo. And it takes about, I think, 5 hours for the water to leave the point where we are regulating what goes into the ditch and what ultimately ends up at Hukipo, where it's actually measured. So they're playing with that right now. Hopefully when we get the diversions and the improvements to the ditch system itself done, we'll have a better handle on it. The best thing that we can do and the KAA can do together is to do remote telemetry. If we could instantaneously manipulate the sluice gates, I think we'll have an easier time understanding how many hours it takes at what kind of rainfall, how much water is flowing. We'll know better how to manipulate Hukipo so that we're never taking more than 6 million gallons when the Waimea River is below 25 million gallons. It's a work in progress. We're close. During rainy seasons, we meet it because Waimea River is above 25. The tricky part are dry times like right now, where Waimea often falls below 25. So we're working on that. And I believe we have periodic meetings with the entire group, about 20-something people, and Seaworm, to discuss where we are in our permitting, where we are on our data collection. What was outstanding about the Waimea Watershed Agreement was that the parties were able to agree to do this setup when we didn't have data. It was very difficult, and we also agreed to come back to the table in a couple of years when we had a little more data to revisit whether these numbers were accurate. But ADC's data seems to indicate that these were pretty close. I'm not sure how the Kokei ditch data is. That's really being monitored by the KIUC. So it is very heavily supervised. There's a lot of exchange of information. Of course, we're not moving as fast enough as the plaintiffs would like. We never move fast enough, but we are, part of it is, just going through a couple seasonal cycles. So we need to know dry weather, wet weather, spring and autumn. We need to know these things. We have to go through them so that we can gauge how best to handle these in-stream flows going forward in the future. Okay, next slide. This is a seaworm picture, and it was just pretty. And I wanted the committee to understand what this agreement accomplished. The shots on the left are probably Kauai and Waihulu, and the shots on the right, and that's pre-petition, pre-agreement, and the shots on the right are the post-agreement situation, condition of the two streams, Waihulu and Kauai. The other case that we were involved in, or we still are working on, is the Clean Water Act in the U.S. District Court. In that case, the plaintiffs wanted ADC. Well, what happened was ADC had taken over the Kekaha Sugar Mill NPDES permit when the sugar mill closed in 2000. In around 2015, and we had continued to renew that permit. In or around 2015, as we went for the next renewal, we were told that our waters really were no longer, since the mill was no longer in operation, that our runoffs were really agricultural runoffs and were excluded from the NPDES requirement. So we pulled our application, and the plaintiffs took it to court to test it, and the court disagreed. The court said that no, these are actual discharges that are covered by the NPDES permit. So we have we entered into a settlement with the plaintiffs to settle the NPDES issues. And one of the things that were required is that we apply for an NPDES permit. We did that in June of 2020. Within months of settling the lawsuit, we knew that this is the way the case was coming down. So we had actually started on the permit application process even before the settlement. And we're just waiting for Department of Health Clean Water Branch to determine. The other requirements of this settlement is that ADC follows storm procedures during storm events, because the permits go to the discharges, the outfalls, and the outfalls are for the most part blocked off during dry periods, during dry conditions. But during storm events, they tend to open naturally, or sometimes they need help with tractors. Those are all part of our storm procedures. We have procedures premised upon the 2011 Army Corps of Engineers Storm Procedures Report, which we follow. That requires that in the event of a storm, the KAA, our co-op, contact ADC, advise us of the conditions. And by the way, the KAA seems to know well in advance, a day or two in advance, that a storm is coming, I think through the National Weather Service reports. They tell us what they intend to do, how many of the outfalls they think will need to be opened. It takes very little discussion because these are almost routine when I know storms are not routine, but because it's the same type of procedure every time, we approve the process. KAA then just goes out and opens the berms if they haven't opened naturally. The only outfall that we cannot touch is the Kikeola Harbor, which is on the other side of Waimea town. And that I think can only be opened with the County of Kauai's Kaima approval. So we are not actually we're not applying for a permit for Kikeola outfall because we can't control it anyway. Historically, I think when the sugar mill had the entire area, including areas under Kikeola Land Company, the sugar mill did take care of that outfall. But ADC has never been able to take care of that, has never been able to control or authorize the opening of that, so we're not going to go after that permit. We've not asked for that permit. The water quality monitoring program was a huge, as you can imagine, element of the settlement because discharges are in large part about contaminants and turbidity. So we entered, it took about, even after we reached the settlement, it took another 6 months or so for the parties to agree on all the sites of testing and the times during the year, wet weather, dry weather, and we've provided those documents to this committee as well. We have agreed on 21 sites, both upland. The yellow part is the DHHL on the cliffs, on the mountains, the Malka lands, and the orange parts on the to the left of the screen is the plain. And you'll see that the sites are very strategically selected The sites just below the yellow hills are intended to capture runoff from the cliffs, from the DHHL side. DHHL and DLNR, because there are forest preserves there as well. The spots, the sites closer to the ocean are more geared towards discharges or conditions of the water just before discharge into the ocean. And you'll see a concentration of sites right near the town. That is to, of course, it's for runoff, it's to test runoff, but it's also to test the conditions of water quality near the residents. So we're checking for nutrients, enterococci. Yeah, that's what we're testing for. Next. I don't think this was part of this was part of the settlement agreement. We also, even while we were involved in the lawsuit, after we had given up our permit, we continued, ADC continued to test water quality. It was just such a waste to have gathered so much data over so many years, decades, and to stop testing for total suspended solids. And I think we were actually testing for nutrients as well for a period after we gave up our permit. So we continued to test, but we gave up the nutrients because we started the water quality monitoring program, which includes nutrients that were going to be duplicative, and it just looked like a duplication of efforts. To this day, we still, I know you can't see it, but you can see that this was the most recent report, September 30th. You can see it, that's the dry weather period. You can see that we're discharging about 6 million gallons per day, and we are well below the detection levels, actionable levels for suspended solids. Again, you can't take these reports in as a snapshot in time as indicative of the entire year, because this is a dry month. Dry months are easy. We watch the wet months more closely because that's when the runoffs occur. Next slide. Another huge element of the settlement was the implementation of BMPs. And the BMPs actually were simply adopted by the district court in conjunction with the settlement, as they were developed by ADC and the Department of Health. Between the time that we gave up our permit and the lawsuit was filed, we had been working with the Department of Health, who told us even if we gave up our permit, we would still have to use best management practices to take care of runoff. And we understood that. So we had started working on BMPs before, a couple of years before. We had consultants come in. The BMPs that we developed were relied in large part on the field office technical guide. That's the NRCS huge guidebook on how to handle a certain slope, or how to handle a certain type of soil condition, or how to handle vegetation, and what vegetation is good, and when vegetation is good, and when vegetation should be better controlled. It's a huge field book. And so in the settlement of the lawsuit, that the BMPs really weren't touched. They were simply adopted as we had drafted it in conjunction with Department of Health. So that's the settlement with the plaintiffs in the U.S. District Court case. In our agreement with the Department of Health, again, remember, which came before the lawsuit and just after we gave up our permit, we also agreed to basically take an inventory of the drainage system, miles and miles of drainage system, 20-something miles if I recall. The BMPs for the drainage system with the Department of Health are very similar to the BMPs for the land, and it follows similar types of guidelines from the field training guide. It's interesting. We are looking at implementing some changes, like maybe extending the width of the drainage to make the slope, the size of the drainage canals more gradual, to slow the speed of the water down before it is discharged. It recommends it recommends better for grass. So tall grass to be grown on the side, mowed, and probably just allowed to lay down on the side of the drainage or sometimes in the drainage. We're gonna watch for additional nutrients if we mow and lay down, because that will probably add nitrogen to the water. These are things that we just have to see as we progress.
I guess it's my turn. Here you see an aerial view of Kalepa, which is about 3 miles from Lehui Airport. Not a very good picture. It's, Google did us disservice on doing this, but anyway, that's, the parcel above what we're looking at. I think this is an old slide. I think this was given to you the last time we did this. It's just the total acreage of land. Much of it is in tree farming. A lot of it is in pasture and, gullies and everything else. But, it's fun. It's being farmed. And this is a Kalepa lands and licenses. And this is the division of how the lots are divided up. And I have to say that this was done prior to coming to ADC. It was done by DLNR, that kind of stuff. And they divided and they found most of the tenants before it before it was shifted to ADC. And here you see a list of all of the farmers that are on the lands. And the next slide. And the farmers and ranchers corporate made up of the parties holding license or revocable permits in Kalepa since 2011. KK has an agreement with ADC to maintain and manage the common roads, gates, related facility to serve various licensed area located on the Kalepa lands. Next slide. Operations is roads. Mainly the operation is maintaining the roads and common element roads and everything. Gates, open lock gates along the common element road. It's been kind of problematic lately, but I think they're struggling with that like every other place. People cut the locks and everything else again. But I think they're doing a fairly good job. Next slide. And here you see Kalepa Coalition. This is a common road. And this is what they've done. And this is a great improvement on, I'm sorry, I didn't have an old picture of the road that what used to look like a lot of mud, water standing and everything else like that. And I have to thank the Department of Transportation for giving us the co-plane for this project. Next slide. This is just a comparison of the two associations. And as you can see on the left, there's members of the KAA. They have 5 of the 11 tenants that excluding revocable permits and everything. But these are the people that I guess put a lot of, with the lands, a lot of lands and everything, that put a lot of revenue into that. The other side is 14 of the 15 tenants. Management, KAA has a manager and 3 workers. Whereas KK has just volunteers. And you can see the total assets. I won't read it and everything else like that, but the total budget for the KA is like $2.2 million just to maintain and operate the area. And then you go across in their annual report. And this is just an annual report for them. It's over 18,000. So, and then you can see the total expense that KA puts into the property. And as you can see, they're taking a loss. Although I think they have, emergency funds and everything to cover the cost and everything like that. And it varies from year to year and everything like that. So, but that's basically what the two differences in the organization. One is very professional. They have the anchor tenants is very important. And that's what makes KA work very well. Next slide. Just want to acknowledge, the KK Agricultural Association, the Kalepa Coalition, the Kauai Island Utilities Corporation, the Commission on Water Resource Management, and of course, Scott Becker's Communication. Next slide. And this is a picture, before I say mahalo to you guys, this is a picture of pumpkins that were grown in Kekaha. And I saw a news, I guess a news clip or release, but this is just part of it. And in Kekaha, I think the Cortiva, and this is Hartang Company, and Cortiva grew pumpkins, and they grew about 4,000 pumpkins, and they're giving them away for all of the people in Kauai, giving it all to the schools and everything. And they were pretty happy that they could do this. And I'm not sure how the businesses selling pumpkins are doing, but, and they're gonna give it out tomorrow, I think. So if you're on Kauai, if you're a Kauai resident, you get a free pumpkin. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. Mahalo.
Thank you, Mr. Nakatani, for that really good overview. I do feel like I know a bit more now about the arrangements. I think there are lots of questions, and I know that we have lots of documents. I'm going to open this up to questions right away, and we'll go through our list, starting off with Chair Hashem as the Ag Chair. Okay, Representative Kobayashi.
No question.
Okay, Representative Yamashita. Representative Tarnas.
Thanks, Mr. Nakatani, and Myra, also for your presentation. I'm interested to understand about the work you're doing on the water quality monitoring, and you know that's an expensive endeavor. And how is that being financed, and how does that fit into your budget? I mean, you don't make any money off of that. It's a big cost center.
You can ask.
That money's come out of our revolving fund. It's over the 2 years, it's $1 million, including the lab tests. So all overall, it's $1 million for 2 years. But it's worth it. I think what we're going to end up seeing in 5 years in Waimea is we'll look back and it was money well spent. It is money well spent. I understand. I'm just curious how it's being financed, and you've got to keep. Now, how long do you expect to continue this monitoring program? Hopefully the monitoring program will go on for a long time until we can develop a system to capture the runoff and reduce the contaminants in the runoff, in the discharges. But at $1 million every 2 years, I'm not sure. You may be hearing from us. Hopefully we can pare it down. We can't do 21 sites year after year. That's just, it's mind-boggling to test that many places. And hopefully what we'll learn as we gather more data, which areas will be better served, where our money is best spent. So hopefully we can develop a pared down version of water quality monitoring. Under the agreement, we're supposed to test some contaminants are tested for 1 year. Those are over. The 1 year mark came in around April or May of this year. Some contaminants are tested for 2 years. Others are tested until we receive an NPDES permit. Mm-hmm. So it's open-ended. It's a little out of our hands, and the court understands that. We have we're gonna go back to court sometime in 2022. I think April is the target date. If we're not able to negotiate amongst ourselves in April, we go back to court in June to explain or to propose what the next steps will be while we wait for the Department of Health.
These are legacy contaminants. I mean,
some of them, yeah. I think almost all of them, yes. Yeah.
So any chance of recouping anything from those who actually put the contaminants into the ground?
I'm going to guess 100 years of Kekaha sugar versus 20 years of our current tenants is primarily the sugar company. So yep. I don't think they don't exist anymore. I don't know where we go.
No chance of any downstream owners or beneficiaries of that sugar company when it was sold, recouping costs there. I mean, this is going to be a recurring question that I'll have is, how do we hold accountable those who put the contaminants in the ground? I'm asking this not only you, because you've got to take care of these legacy contaminants, but also in your leases, how are you making sure that we're not left with contaminants in our land, when those leases are POW. So it's, because this is a problem that we see throughout the state. And I'm just curious how you're working to address that.
It might actually be, the answer might actually be a more practical one. The only areas that we found that were of issue were the total suspended solids, the enterococcus, and, the petroleum hydrocarbons. That's true. So really,
So it's the third one that really is.
That's the one that we would have to address.
Yep.
But because there isn't any industrial use anymore on that land, I'm going to guess that it's not as bad as we are prepared to address. Right now, we have mostly production, almost all production. No mill work.
Right,
no
so you're not
processing.
adding to the problem. I understand.
Absolutely. I think that's right. I think it's plateaued, it's stable.
So we'll just have to see what the data shows over time.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas. Rep. Perruso.
Yeah, I have a quick question following up on Rep. Tarnas's question. And so when I look at your lease agreements with some of the lessees for the KAA lands, and we just got these documents, so I'm not completely familiar with them yet, and I hope we have time to follow up again later. But I do notice that there was some legal attention given to responsibility for contamination. So I note that was already a consideration when you're drafting those leases. I saw clear delineation of responsibility for contamination prior to the leasehold and then subsequent to the contract being executed. But so I thought that was important. I didn't see a lot of language around remediation. So I was curious about whether this experience with these two lawsuits, and I think just one in particular really, has led you to maybe reconsider the language of those leases, to reopen those leases and to revisit making the language stronger to protect the state. Because I think that that's a really important consideration. I know that some of these lessees are terminating their leases. So we may be moving away from an era in, industrial agriculture and GMOs on Kauai, but I am still concerned about that legacy. And I think that if we have the power to draft license language that protects the state more, I don't know if you've given that any thought.
Can I try that? Yes, thank you, Rep. Perruso. So actually, we just took a look at the Clayton Group report, which was done in around 2000 or 2003, just before we took the lands. And that's the language that you see referred to in the licenses. And that was the Clayton Group report was an environmental site assessment phase 1, but it really focused on the industrial activities. And again, as we said, like with the TPH type of contaminants, I think we're going to find that those are not really the problem areas. It's going to be more the production areas. Right now, we don't have any contamination above detection levels. So we have some comfort, but that really doesn't address our concern, which is how do you hold a tenant responsible for damage to state lands during their tenure? How do you make sure that they're not responsible for damage to the lands prior to their tenure? The licenses don't address that. And I'm not sure why. I think historically, no one really paid much attention to the types of, to remediation of atrazine, for instance. So we actually already spoke to some of our bigger tenants, the KAA members, to say that this is something we're looking at. Your licenses are nearing the expiry, and whether they'd be willing to sit down with us before the expiry to figure this out. And so far, they're just such a great group out there. So far, we're getting interest in sitting down and talking about this. And the way we pose it also is we want to make sure that you're not responsible for Kikaha sugar contamination. So it benefits everyone that we sit down and figure out how best to, I don't know if we'll ever be able to figure it out, but at least going forward, if we can recognize sort of like the way we entered into the Waimea Watershed Agreement and even the Clean Water Act Agreement, we don't have enough information, but that in and of itself doesn't mean that we can't sit down and figure out something that's closer to win-win than 5 or 10 years of protracted litigation. So it's a really good question. We have been looking at that. We don't know what the answer is yet, but we would like to talk with our partners and see if we can't come up with something.
And I'm worried about, sorry, if I can just go ahead. I'm worried about those companies going bankrupt and then leaving us in the lurch and those lands not being productive ag lands or usable ag lands. So I wonder about proactive measures, remediation that we can require as part of their process of engaging in agriculture on those lands. So to build that in, and that's just, something to consider, but yeah. Thank you for getting that process started.
Rep. Ichiyama? I'm going to follow up on this question, and I really, really only got a chance to delve into 1 or 2 licenses, but I saw as one of the end dates, 20-year period. So we're looking at many of these licenses coming due in like around 2028. Is that an accurate kind of framing? And again, we'll get, as we look through this, what I want to know for the committee's sake is like, what time frame are we working with for these questions? And so to give you guys lead time and build in time to really address these questions. I think the expiration of these leases and knowing what kind of timeline we're looking at was helpful for future legislative recommendations as well. So that's the question. And if you don't know the complete answer, we can dig through that and find that information. But if you could give me a sense, because 2028 is actually not that far away.
Yeah, we actually have a spreadsheet. We did not produce it in response to the subpoena, but we already have a spreadsheet that lays out the expiry for every license. So that should be easy to compile.
Okay, great. That would be actually very interesting for us to see, I think. Okay, we're going to go back through the list. Chair Hashem. Chair Kobayashi. Chair Yamashita. Chair Tarnas.
Thanks. I wanted to ask about what role you're playing in identifying the crops and such that the farmers and the companies are growing there, or is it that you just put out a request for proposal and take what comes? What sort of evaluation do you go through in order to decide what's the best thing to grow?
Actually, we really don't do that. Okay. Farming is a tough business, as you know. So it's really up to we can give the farmer guidance as to what's economical. And everything comes down to economics. If the farmer is not economical, if the farming operation is not economical, then it doesn't really make any sense for any operation or for any business, right? So give guidance when people, especially when they're not from Kauai and they want to come in and they're not very knowledgeable about marketing and shipping and everything like that. We would just give them maybe not so much advice, but we'd turn them to like the University of Hawaii and maybe the department and say, these are the issues that you would be facing. So think about it, that kind of stuff. But we don't have, and I'm not too anxious about going in and dictating to them what the crops would be. I think it's the opposite way around. If they wanted to do something, the crop and everything else like that, then I would try as much as possible to help them make it lucrative or something like that,
Thank you. I'd be interested to understand, based on your experience now, trying to figure out what to do with these lands and make them productive, whether you would suggest changes in the statute that actually directs ADC what they should be doing. Because sometimes I read that and I think, wow, this was written at a different time when we had a different assumption. And I would be interested to hear what your suggestions are for modifying the statute.
I think that we kind of talked about it with the chair and with Chair Hashem also. And if you look at and I made this statement to the auditors, And they say, well, can't you do X, Y, and Z? And I said, well, you got to look at how many people we have. And what we're focusing on is the lands that we got to put them in production. Because that was the whole thing. I mean, producing food for ourselves, being self-sufficient, whatever that, for food. Now, there's so many things in the statute that was, when it was drafted, 20 years ago, and try to make the transition from plantation, pine sugar to diversified agriculture. Throughout, it's changed throughout times and everything, and we should adjust. A lot of I wouldn't say lots, but, of the 9, one chapter had 9 issues and everything else like that. Some of it has been done, like transportation study. That hasn't changed much. I mean, I don't know if it's going to change within the next 20 years also, just because, neighbor islands, we're on an island, right? We don't have too many options and everything else like that. So, those suggestions are still valid. We have land use, take an inventory of land use and everything that was done by University of Hawaii. Jeff Melrose, of course, he passed away, but working with the University of Hawaii. So they did some of that. If anything, the lands are shrinking, what's available. And just pressures from, resident housing and everything else like that. Things like that. What is the other one? Like marketing. It's kind of like duplication. I get really interested in marketing because we're out there farming. And then when I say, I look at the big island as potential, what is the potential? You see papaya. We were one of the kingpins of papayas before. So why can't we get back on? We can. Okay. The nursery products, right? That was the big islands, one of the biggest crop on the big island and everything. Breadfruit is becoming something that we should take an interest in, whether fresh or processed and everything else like that. And breadfruit can go throughout the state, So those are the kind of things, and even I guess in Waimea or in Hawaii, you have Ms. Bob Anderson with his fish and everything else like that. Yeah. Very interesting project. Visited him a couple of times, but we don't really explore new crops. And I'm always interested in doing that. I go down there, visit him a couple of times and everything, but we're such a small entity. We belong to the department, and there should be a closer relationship on how to move agriculture forward. And, because I get excited because when you talk about agriculture, you look at the innovations from IT, the military and everything, it's transferring into agriculture. And that's the reason why you have climate control, greenhouses and everything. It's pretty exciting, right? So we're kind of we're getting there, but it takes a lot of revenue sometimes, right? Investments for that kind of stuff like that. But I think that there's a lot of hope for doing that kind of stuff like that. But marketing, I don't know what, we can help, but we shouldn't duplicate any efforts, and even financing and everything. We shouldn't do financing. There's lots of financial, institutions out there. There's a department, there's FSA. There's farm credit, right? There's a private banks and everything else like that. So those are the kind of issues, or that's the kind of statute that maybe we shouldn't be doing. In fact, we shouldn't be doing that, So those are just some of the suggestions that is duplication, or it has been done that, we shouldn't get involved in that.
I appreciate that you brought those up and shared it with the chair because, the statute, I think, needs to be updated. And if I remember correctly, it was talking about producing crops for export, but now the big push is to provide food for local consumption. So it's an entirely different paradigm.
Well, that's true, but at the same time, we should be always looking at export, right? Because supposing we get really successful with breadfruit. I was down at Paina, it's an irrigation plant in Kunia, and there were containers full of 2 containers, 40 foot with ulu. And I said, "Where's this going to?" He says, "Utah."
Believe me, I'm okay with exporting.
Yeah.
I have no trouble with that. But the statute was really focused on that because that's what we were doing previously.
Right. So it's not that we're, married to just food production, but there was a pressure and everything like that. I mean, and that's sometimes when I talk to Chair Hashem, it's like we have conflicting issues, right? We come on one side of the house, they said food production. We go to the other side, say export. It's like, okay. It's like, we do big production. You hear us says do big production. I said, okay. And then somebody says, do small farming. And they said, wait a minute, right? So we get caught in between there. It's not bad. I mean, I think there's room for all, but it's just that kind of ease off on that and kind of like, to put it bluntly, make up your mind what you want us to do. I think we can do both. I think there's room for all of that. And things have changed, especially when I go back to and I say innovation, like, that's coming over, the IT stuff like that. It's not huge farms. It's 50 acres on the greenhouse that can make you produce, like 10 times what you can do on the lands and everything like that.
Yeah. That's why we increase the size of greenhouses that we can build without building permits.
That's correct. But we're kind of behind, but we can catch up. We don't have the issues like you go to, we went to on the mainland, right? I mean, they have extreme heat and they have extreme cold. I mean, we get hot, but take for example, people are hot to trot to go in Representative Perruso's area, Waiwa, 10 degrees difference from Mililani. Big difference in greenhouse production. Unfortunately, we were unable to pull it off. We had a grant and we couldn't pull it off. But those are the kind of things that we look at. And people come in, I mean, Waimea, perfect for greenhouses because it's cool and everything else like that. Problem, transportation. Okay, so how do you get lettuce, very fragile, to the marketplace?
Vacuum and cooling plant.
Right, so cooling plant and everything, but how do you do that without, keeping the cost down?
Yeah.
So, all kinds of opportunity. I mean, it's out there, we just gotta figure it out.
Well, the legislators aren't usually the best to decide what's the best strategy for an agricultural effort like yours. That's why I'm asking you, based on your experience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm getting there. It's just that I'm getting pulled apart, left and right and everything. But we can get there. I mean, it's exciting. I mean, I don't. If I didn't have that much interest, I would say, given my age, I would say, see you. So anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Nakatani.
But thank you for bringing it up. I think that's great. Well, we should have a good conversation on that. And I'm looking at your Act 90 and I'm saying, well, that's even more room for export. Maybe we can export beef next. So
we're working on it.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Rep. Perruso?
I think we are exporting beef. I have questions. So the first question is with respect to land. On Kauai, it's my understanding that all of the ADC land on Kauai is ceded land that was transferred from DLNR. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so that's 12,000 acres. And it looks like what is being farmed is about 4,300 acres, but that's not, about 3,500 acres is tillable.
I would say intensely farmed, maybe about 3,500.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
and that's a small fraction. And you were talking about how under a sugar regime, it had been more productive, like some of those lands had been usable, or did I mishear you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We had that conversation this morning. I think what plays a big part, and I think Myra brought it up, and then there's that has to do with pumping of that, the how much water we pump out. And you see a big area that's in the pink. That's part of that area is like it's prone to flooding, and also it's high water table because it's rising. We're not pumping as much, so it's coming. The water is rising in the Mana Plains. Okay. So there's a lot of. I guess you could plant something like taro or something like that. And Myra reminded me, but you don't want to plant something that attract birds because of the base and everything else like that. But
that land could be cultivated.
Yeah.
Could be cultivated.
Yeah.
I don't think our message is coming across really clear. So in our effort to balance the clean water discharge, we agreed not to pump below 1.5 feet.
Okay.
Before, when these lands were drier, we were pumping, or the sugar company was pumping down to 3 feet below mean sea level. Because we are trying to limit our discharges, the ground is getting more saturated.
Yeah.
And our challenge is to find the right crop that will flourish in different types of soil with different saturation levels.
Right. So like low ikalo is what.
Except that we have to check with the Navy because they may not, they won't want it too close to, they may not want it too close to the base. On the other hand, the areas that are becoming saturated, they're basically returning to marsh.
Right.
And that's why our tenants are slowly returning them to us because they're no longer fit for their intended purpose, which was to grow, say, diversified crops of corn. They may not want like taro within so many, feet or yards of their airstrip.
Do you have an agreement with PMRF?
I'm sorry?
Do you have an agreement, like Sentinel Landscape or some kind of agreement where the military is paying you to maintain a buffer?
We have a huge agreement with the Navy. We are usually the only bidder for that, the pumping. The
That's
pumping
just
that
for
we
the
do.
water though, right?
The
water control.
The water, the discharging, the water, the pumps, and the drainage canals.
Right.
Right.
But not for maintaining that land, like to. So there are.
I know where you're heading. I do.
There are arrangements that are made in other parts of the country where the military subsidizes the maintenance of a buffer zone.
So they have a restrictive use easement. We have to go back and check. Before we approach them, we're gonna take a look at that easement on the areas closest to the base. But I like the idea that they do set aside money to help these types of efforts, either the Navy or maybe the NRCS, anyone who will help us with the wetland. Yeah, I like that. It's a source of funding. That'd be great.
Yeah, especially for water management. Sorry, I have more questions. But then the other question related to the ceded lands is just something I keep coming back to. And I noticed in your financial work that you, and I only remember looking at 2015, 2016, and then 2017, 2018 maybe, but I remember in each of those years, a certain, you talked about the revenue from Kekaha. And then in brackets, it said less the amount for OHA/DHHL. And then, so I got curious, does that mean that there was an additional 20% on top of that revenue that then you sent to OHA? But then I called OHA and they said, well, as of 2020, you had given 43,000 for OHA.
Yeah, so I think other land managers have separate accounts for land rental accounts, coding for rents, and then they have different codings for custodial deposit accounts, like ceded lands, 20% to OHA, 30% to DHHL.
And all of yours just goes into the agricultural development
Exactly.
fund. Okay.
So we have a new fiscal officer right now, and we have one of his tasks of the 100 list of priorities. I don't know exactly where this one falls, but that is to take a look at separating out our accounts. And I don't know how we do it. Maybe we have to go through DAGs, getting accounts assigned. So because we're commingling everything's being dumped into a 307 into our revolving account. I think when we say less deposit accounts, that means we're giving you the gross, but we're only have the net available for use. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then just for my clarification, then the remainder of the revenues from those ceded lands are staying in that Hawaii Agricultural Development Fund, correct?
That's correct. Until we can turn it over to, I think every periodically we're supposed to turn it over to the proper agency, DHHL or OHA. I don't quite know how we do that.
I think that you already showed it.
Oh, did we turn it over?
Well, no, you don't say that you turn over the revenue. You say that you gave a part. So what percentage, the 20% to OHA? right? That's already, so what you're doing with that revenue with respect to the requirements in the Constitution, that's already noted. And then the rest, I'm
Okay.
just clarifying, stays in that account.
Okay.
Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Okay.
That sounds correct.
Thank you.
Any more questions, Rep. Perruso? You're asking my question, so you can keep going.
I do have another question,
Yes, is it,
unless somebody
Go
else
ahead.
has a question.
go ahead, Rep. Perruso. Oh, no, you do have.
So I also noticed, and this is happening in my district too, so I've been tracking that. And we've been having that discussion about DLNR and the Special Land Development Fund. And the reliance on RPs or RUPs, or the restricted permits, right? Right, so that are supposed to be for a limited time, but seem to last a long time. And I am trying to track, and I'm not seeing many of them turn into licenses. Like, for example, the folks who are grandfathered in my district, they're paying very low rental rates for very large parcels of land. And then I also have some questions about DH Horton or VR Horton and the Gilbert lands, but then that can wait. So I'm curious about whether, if you've been paying attention to this conversation about these restricted permits.
Revocable permits.
Revocable permits, that's the word. And if you are inclined to change your policy around the revocable permits. I see a reliance on them.
You know, we try not to have revocable permits for a long period of time. We have very little in Kikaha. We have one for this resident, Gary Smith. And the revocable permit is his backyard faces one of the drainage ditch. And he insists that he get a revocable permit. So he can use that portion of that space from his house to the ditch for his own purpose. And so we said, actually we should be paying him for keeping the place clean, but he wanted a revocable permit. So we gave him a revocable permit.
Okay.
And
So
the other-
Kikaha, not much. Kalepa, do you have?
No, this is in Kikaha.
Right, but okay, sorry.
In Kalepa, I believe we may have one revocable permit. And the reason why we have a revocable permit because they haven't been able to comply with the conditions of their license. That kind of stuff like that. But for all in all, we don't like revocable permits for our anchor tenants or anything else like that. Yeah.
Whitmore is an issue. We use RPs.
Yeah.
And the Galbraith, I mean not the Galbraith, but the folks who've been grandfathered in my district.
Yeah, I'm not sure about grandfathering in on Oahu.
Yeah.
We especially the Whitmore area, what's probably going to end up being the Whitmore project or the food hub. Every time I read about it, it's called something different, but it's that area, the 24 acres plus a portion of the 257 acres on the way to NC Tams. Those we keep on RPs. And that's been going on since we purchased the property in about 2013. And the reason why we don't want to give them licenses, we had a choice. We could give them short-term licenses, 5-year licenses, maybe 10-year licenses. We could do that. But we chose to go with RPs because we thought the food hub was going to move quickly. And it kind of, we didn't have enough interest. We didn't have enough use. So we didn't want to put the money into building something and no one came. So we kept these people on RPs. I guess we have another design right now that Jimmy and the project managers are working on. If that one shows promise, we'll keep them on RPs because we want to be able to terminate these. We wouldn't give them 30 days notice. We'd give them a year, to get out, 6 months. But if it looks like that's going to fall through, I hope that doesn't. But if the same thing happens to this, is that the UH project?
Yes.
The UH project as happened to the food hub, then, maybe we should convert them over to a short-term license, no more than 10 years or no more than 5 years. We want to, if you look at that property, the improvements are dilapidated and we need to do something. We can't leave them in that condition. And yet we don't want to get into the business of what Dole was doing, which was doing machine shop work. And, we want the industry to do that. We want the state to just be able to promote the industry, the ag industry. We don't want to get into the ag industry. And so we want the flexibility, I think is what we're looking for. Something that would allow us to most reasonably deal with our tenants so they can use it at a cheaper rate for an RP, for a dilapidated building for a shorter period of time on potentially 30 days notice versus giving them a more expensive license and then to be the state to be saddled with a 10-year license and to have our projects being held up because we promised them 10 years.
Yeah.
So we're right in that period where we have to look at our projects, the interest in the community, and then of course our tenants, what's in the best interest of our tenants.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Rep. Yamashita.
I want to go back to the conversation that you were having with Chair Tarnas. I was sitting egg for many years. So one of the things that I remember was big at that time was probably invasive species. So part of the talk was in all the nurseries and ornamentals, most of the invasives comes through that being imported. And so that they were talking at the time of increasing that. And then most recently, the government wanted to increase food production. So the focus changed. So this goes to your point of you've been talking about different directions, right? Export, import, whatever. And then, but I believe that because of this push for growing local, we have shut down nurseries, and it's going to create that problem because they're going to start importing more and more, and they basically all not going to come back. Well, it never happened, but it'll become a bigger issue at some point. So does ADC have a strategy on how to counter that?
To be honest, not really. I think that I'll give you an example. The lands that we in Whitmore or Galbraith, because this started off with the city and county of Honolulu. We want small farmers. We want food, and that was our
I understand.
priority, right?
That's been the push.
Yeah.
My point is that
I know what you're saying, and then for us, I think maybe the next step is that we look at a combination of like what you're talking about, nurseries and everything else like that. I think that's something we should look at. Certainly, yeah, I can hear that. I can see that, and there's places that we have that would be good for nurseries and everything else like that. Just because of the limitation on water and everything else like that, we can look at that. I mean, we need to just circle back, and we need to do that. I think we need to also touch base with the Department of Agriculture. And one of the projects that we have in Whitmore is the Christmas tree, the guy growing Christmas tree. And what we wanted him to do was expand even further. So, you talk about every Christmas. We don't want to be the Grinch and cancel Christmas, not having a Christmas tree. So that kind of stuff like that. So there's room. I mean, we're constantly looking at that. And I think that so long they don't mandate that we got to do food, I think we're okay.
yeah. Well, I understand people. Normally, I think one of the largest nurseries to check on most sophisticated is take care of crops in their seeding. And they not doing now, like all the big boxes are just morsels shipping everything. Those are the ones that we have concerns with. I know it's not your area, but the Department of Ag being inspecting.
I'm not getting the Department of Agriculture in trouble, but part of the problem is that because the world got smaller, with transportation issues and everything, and one of the biggest problems that we always have is that we have a hard time getting to quarantine, and passing quarantine in California and everything, and that to me is a bigger bottleneck to the nursery industry than anything else. Because you take California like that, very strict, to get your plants in there. And what I'm talking about quarantine is like when they look at insects and diseases and everything else like that, they reject plants and everything else like that. So California being a good big market and everything else there. You can go to Canada, and what happened with the pandemic is that they cut the transportation mode out, and they couldn't get product out of Hawaii, and basically it was by air. And so, that dampened, that had a dramatic effect, on getting the plants and flowers out from Hawaii, But there's a lot of room, and then we should look, as I said to Representative Tarnas, I think that the nursery industry we should look at rebuilding it, export, very lucrative, and then we produce very good, nice plants, so we should be able to take that market.
Thank you. Members, any more questions? Okay. Chair Tarnas and then Rep. Perruso.
Thanks. I've always been curious about this. Now, ADC is the agency that really has control over those former sugar lands that are now owned by the state. Is that pretty much the case? For all the former sugar lands that are owned by the state, ADC has responsibility for all of them or most of them?
Two of them.
Two of them.
Two of them.
But just in terms of total acreage, the reason here, I can tell you why I'm asking is that, DHHL depends on, they get 30% of any revenue generated on these former sugar lands, right? And that's what you were just talking about. You've got to pay 30% to there. And they use this money to give grants to serve homestead communities. So they really would benefit by getting more. And I was just curious because I would be interested to know, out of all the state-owned sugar lands, whether you have control over most of them or what. You don't have to answer that now. But my main question is, does DHHL work with you? Because it's in their best interest to have you succeed and make lots of revenue off of these former sugar lands, so they get 30% of it. So is there any cooperative relationship between you and DHHL?
You guys have given a lot of loaded questions, Actually, I think the people in Kikaha work well with DHHL because there's the neighbors and everything. Other than that, I think we have very little communication, And, at one time, I don't know why I said this, but if we really wanted to move agriculture forward, then we need to, widen that, make that circle bigger. So as you mentioned, if DHHL is a player and they have lands, and Department of Agriculture, and DLNR, and DBED, and us, then we should sit down and look at a strategy. Our problem is that we, I guess, and that's maybe human nature. I think we're still in a silo mode, I think that's the fact, and we could do more, and it's always, I don't know how to solve that, but, we do our best at ADC. I think we're very progressive, and sometimes that's our own worst enemy because it's like, there they go again, we push hard. We have 6 people in the office. I think we've pushed a lot to get agriculture forward. And I don't mind partnering with anybody else. Whoever wants to partner, I'm game, because like I said, we have only 6 people. Understood.
That's why I was asking. Since DHHL benefits directly from any of the revenue that's generated on their former sugar lands, that 30% of that goes to them. Seems like they would be motivated to work with you. Sounds like there isn't much collaboration really between the two.
I guess it's not too much. I think there's always could be more.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Perruso.
Yes, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the black boxes on the map. So you said that KAA is in those areas moving towards diversified agriculture and small farming. And you and I have had conversations about small farming or small farmers before. And I just wanted to kind of ask a couple questions about that and really looking at your Galbraith model. So it's my understanding that the terms of the purchase from Galbraith required that certain portion of the land be dedicated to small farmers, which you did. And you, I think 300 and something acres were split between about 10 farmers. And what I really liked when I was looking through the materials is the training that you required for them, the preparation that you required from them, the fact that you made all of the infrastructure available for them. And I'm wondering if that same kind of support is happening on the KAA lands, if you know, and you may not, because I recognize that KAA is managing those lands, not ADC.
Yeah, you're talking about the Waiaka farms like that. Okay, so what's in progress is that talk to what's his name, Mike, and I think that ask them what kind of help you need. And I mean, I know they're very capable of, but this year we're planning to put in 500,000 CIP to help with the infrastructure and to help clear the land and everything else like that. I'm not sure of, it's diversified agriculture. I'm not sure of the size that they're looking at, but I think that for them is like as a community, if you were, and I think we submitted the KAA strategic plan to this body. And if we didn't, we can do that. But it's really to help the whole community, the farming community. And one of the line is to make the motto is to make the best agricultural organization in the state, which is like, okay, that's a very good statement. That's for Waiaka and includes everybody in that area. And I think that just and going back, the companies are very sensitive, to the community. I mean, they're doing like the pumpkin and everything else like that. I mean, but I mean, it's like for the whole island and everything else like that. So I think they're on the right track, and it's just getting, I guess, people to understand, and people need to understand that farming is not an easy task, and especially in Kikaha because it's far out. I mean, it has so much potential agriculturally, but it lacks facility, it lacks housing. And then somewhat you're involved with DOE getting the BEX, facility. I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but that certainly could be a focal point for the smaller farmers to come, to build out, as even a transit area, packing house. Because you cannot imagine that 10 farmers or 20 farmers going all the way from Kikaha to Lehue to the airport and to get it out versus having one vehicle go there. So there is a lot of potential, and I guess we just have to wait to see how it unfolds.
Okay. But, Thank you. And then just a quick follow-up about the Galbraith small farmer model. I noticed too that and I would like some clarification. Galbraith put another rider on that. I guess it was a donation of $2 million to the purchase price. Or not Galbraith, DR Horton put $2 million towards that purchase.
500,000.
500,000? Okay, I was thinking it was 2 million, but I can go back and look at it was only 500,000.
Yes.
And for that, they got to designate 3 farmers.
They had to accommodate three of the farmers, and it was Kalena Farm, Larry Jeffs,
yep,
the Hose, and Alexu.
Yep.
Yeah, those 3. So
I was just wondering, I'm curious about their motivation because I saw D.R. Horton as a land developer, and I don't understand how they profit from that.
I'm not sure how they profit from that. I think there was something to do with housing credits or something like that, or to accommodate just the farming community because those 3 were a big. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I forgot. I'm not sure.
I thought that was.
I would be just speculating at this point.
Okay.
And I don't want to be too technical about it, but they weren't given the right to pick 3 farmers. They were given the right of first refusal. So when the lands were made available, we had to go to D.R. Horton first to say, are you interested? That's how that turned out. Yeah.
But their 3 farmers were the ones who. Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, any more questions on this topic? Members, we have been going for about an hour and a half. I know that there's going to be more questions moving forward, as well as because we have 1,600 documents in front of us. I did want to move to the last part of our agenda. However, members, before we do that, this is going to be the status update on the September 2021 brush fire on ADC Wahimo lands. Members, pursuant to our rules, we can dispense with the requirement of taking testimony under oath or affirmation at any particular instance in a committee by majority vote of the committee members present at the hearing. My recommendation is, because this is such a fresh incident and really we just want a status update, investigation I'm assuming is still ongoing. And so I'd like to take a vote, sorry Vice Chair, to suspend or remove this portion of the hearing from under testimony under oath or affirmation pursuant to House Investigative Rule 2.6. Members, any questions? Okay, seeing no questions or discussion, Vice Chair, for the vote.
Chair's recommendation is to suspend the taking of testimony under oath. Chair, Vice Chair vote aye. Rep. Hashem?
Aye.
Rep. Perruso?
Aye.
Rep. Tarnas?
Aye.
Rep. Yamashita? Okimoto is excused. Chair, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. And members, in front of you or at your seat, there was 2 handouts left for you. It's a written statement status update and then a map provided by ADC this afternoon. So I do want to acknowledge to our guest here that this was passed out. And then I wanted to turn it over to Mr. Nakatani for the status update.
Okay, thank you. I just want to, I guess it's unfortunate that the fire was going to happen. And just to give you a background, I think that Representative Perruso texted, I think, one of my staff that they were having activities on this parcel. And I think we have a roving security, and what we did was we put the roving person unroving it just stationary, just at the gate of the property. And I think this started from Saturday, and the fire unfortunately was on Monday, and it was in like 11:30 in the morning. And just to give you some background, that that property has been with my staff, and HPD has been, at least on a weekly basis, they've gone through the property and, chased out, people, unauthorized people there. We did like 51 trespassing arrests and everything else like that. So it's not lack of trying to keep, that person out. And unfortunately, the fire came about. And prior, after that, on the 29th of September, we issued the licenses to 2 people for that parcel. And if you look at the map, I think that's the area that, and I just want to summarize, that's the area that of concern that the fire was. So you have a lot of other areas that are not affected by that. And so what we're planning to do is that we're still on the investigation on the fire and everything else like that. We're in contact with the health department to see what how to clean it up. We're about to procure an environmental consultant to give us guidance on what we need to do. And Stitcher Steel came in. They took out all of the cars, no cost to the state. And they also did, before they took out the cars, they did a grid, drone, and then they staked out areas of concern. So that's really helpful. Like, this is no findings, this area we're looking at. So really waiting for the procurement to hire somebody to look at this. And then after that, we could give you a better report. And some of the questions asked, like, why didn't you take these cars out prior to that? We did take like 150 cars before that. And unfortunately, the cars that were left behind was not that accessible, grass growing all over and everything. Here came the fire, and then it's totally exposed. So it's unfortunate that happened. And so that's probably what we intend to do. And and we're just trying to secure that area, and it's a very, very tough area to secure. And I think if you look at the map, you see that red square by the bridge, that's Pomoho Bridge. And that's really an area of concern because that's an encampment and that's where much of the problems are coming from. You know, they come over, I mean, we kick them out and everything else. They go under the bridge and, you know, the encampment over there and come back. The good news is that I got an email from Ed Sniffen yesterday afternoon, and the inspectors went out and they intend to they issued warnings that they're going to sweep the area and get rid of that problem. Hopefully it doesn't return that quickly, but basically that's where we are. And I can answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. If there's any brief questions, and then members, I will also forward you the electronic copies of the statement as well as the map, so you'll have a better picture of that. I know Rep. Perruso, this is your community, so questions.
Yeah, so thank you for the update. And I had heard more than 1,000 cars, so it's good to get, you know, 600. I'll use that as my official number. I am hearing concerns from the community who experienced the fire about toxicity and the kinds of chemicals that were involved in the fire. So I know that you're talking about the Department of Health being involved, but I'm also interested in whether or not the EPA will be involved because I mean, it may or may not be a cleanup site. I understand there are generators and so on.
I believe the Department of Health is an agent for EPA, and okay. I think that if we needed, I mean, they could come in. I think that what, you know, I'm just depending on the Department of Health to give us guidance. And one of the requirements is that you come up with an environmental plan to clean up. And part of that first step is to hire an environmental engineer. I mean, you know, look at all the toxicity, give a report, and then come up with a plan and then clean it up.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
I'm certain there will be more focus on this moving forward, but go ahead, Rep. Perruso, and then we'll
last question.
Yes.
And I am also concerned about the pattern that has developed over time, not just with relationship to that encampment, but that area, I would say all along Kamehameha Highway on that side, and the criminal activity that's become, it seems like ingrained in the community patterns of behavior. And I was wondering if you are also having conversations with HPD about more intense scrutiny in that area, or what the policing plan is.
You know, HPD has been actually really helpful. In the beginning, we reached out to the sheriffs because it's public lands and everything else like that, and I guess they're kind of strapped also. And then, but the HPD has been for a while. I mean, for the Whitmore area has been really, really great. I mean, they've come out and helped us in the community. As I said, you know, they've gone out with my staff member, maybe on a weekly basis to look at the area and everything. I know it's a chronic area, Representative Perruso, and that's something maybe that you could help us with because this is a community problem, you know, and then even talking to, you know, and it's a community problem. It's just not ADC's problem. It's not just DOT's problem. It's not Pomo's problem. You know, it's a community problem, and it's very, very difficult for us by ourselves to solve a social issue and everything else like that. You know, and I mean, they're unfortunately they have to live like this, but and some of them are. What you encounter is that, you know, they're criminals. And when you talk to HPD, I mean, they said, I wouldn't go down there by myself. And, you know, one of my staff member, Ken, was here and, you know, he's gung-ho and he used to go down there and they said, you know, Ken, don't do that anymore. But it is a chronic problem. And if anybody has a better answer versus just blaming ADC, you got to do this. I mean.
No, I agree.
You know,
I agree. And I think actually I would love to get together and develop some kind of task force to develop a more regional approach to the problem because it's like it crosses districts too. So it's kind of a mixed territory area.
Yeah, and hopefully that we gave the licenses out and hopefully by clearing the land and have these people occupy the land, hopefully a lot of the problems would subside, you know. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, members, for a very productive, long day of hearings. There's much work still ahead of us. I want to thank the testifiers who are here. We will be back next week, Thursday, and then please look out for future hearing notices and meeting notices, and we will certainly be in touch with you and your staff, Mr. Nakatani. Thank you very much, members. We are adjourned.
Thank you.